Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. And the most important updates are coming from Kyiv, very important things. During the previous night the Russians made another massive missile attack all over the entire Ukraine. The rockets were flying, let's say, above the central, western, eastern part of Ukraine, and the Russians were conducting the reconnaissance operation. And after the Russians managed to discover probably the possible position of Ukraine air defense, most of the Russian missiles changed their courses and started attacking Kyiv. In Kyiv, we had a lot of explosions. As you can see, we have a lot of photos, let's say evidence, video evidence of fire, destructions, destroyed facilities, some parts, some ruins, and so on. And this is very important. The thing is that the Ukrainians have a lot of problems with air defense and missiles to the air defense. A lot of air defense systems the Russians managed to destroy during the previous phase, during January and February, during the attacks in Avdiivka, during the attacks on Belgorod region. So a lot of problems, and the Ukrainians, that's why we're forced to redeploy a significant number of air defense as close as possible to Avdiivka and to the line of combat contact. And the main reason of this, let's say, redeployment is that the Russians use Su-30, Su-34, let's say guided bombs, and to destroy as many as possible Russian planes, the Ukrainians redeployed their air defense forces as close as possible to the line of combat contact. That's why the Russians decided to start bombing and attacking Kyiv once again. And as we can see, as a result of the Russian, let's see, maneuver, we see the Russian strikes all over the Kyiv. So that's why now the Ukrainians have are forced to make a decision, to decide either they're going to keep their air defense forces, let's say, somewhere on Donetsk and Donbas direction, or they will be forced to move their air defense forces back towards Kyiv, and this will lead to significant losses from the Ukrainian side on the line of combat contact, because the Russians will be able to start using air forces once again, massive air forces everywhere. And this is like just this interesting maneuver from the Russian and Ukrainian side, but also this maneuver can mean one thing, that the Russians are about to start the greatest counter-offensive or greatest offensive operation, maybe in Belgorod direction. Maybe the Russians are planning to start offensive in Avdiivka or somewhere else. And first of all, they need to secure the area, and they need to force the Ukrainians to remove air defense forces. And now this is exactly what they're doing right now. So maybe in a week or in a two, maybe earlier, the Russians will start something very big. And of course, we can make a conclusion, like I made just now, based on more attempts from the Russian side to attack Kyiv. If the Russians continue attacking Kyiv tomorrow, day after tomorrow, and more waves of attacks, and anyway, it will force sooner or later the Ukrainians to move air defense forces back, and this is going to be the beginning of something big. Also, very interesting details and updates are coming from Kherson direction. The Russians continue destroying and attacking the Ukrainian boats and, let's say, sea port infrastructure, ships, boats, and different yachts with Lancet strike. On this video, for example, we can see how the Russians managed to discover another boat, another, let's say, ship in the vicinity of the village by the name of Grigorevka, and as a result of Lancet strike, that boat was damaged and destroyed. Probably this is the military ship that Ukrainians were using or were planning to use for some special operations on the Kinborn and Tender speeds. Who knows? A little bit to the east, we have another attack. On this video, for example, we can see the Ukrainian radar in the area that Ukrainians were using probably to discover the Russian air forces and to discover maybe the Ukrainian position, the Russian positions, maybe just the air forces missiles, and that radar was destroyed as a result of Lancet strike. Of course, these two videos doesn't show us anything, but to understand the picture better, we need to increase the numbers of updates, at least, let's say, since the beginning of March. And for example, in this case, we continue receiving more updates of destroyed boats in the vicinity of the village by the name of Elevatorная. We have the Russians bombing the small island between Kinborn Spit and the town by the name of Achakov. So we have a lot of updates on this area. We have the results of strike in the area of the village by the name of Chernomorskaya. We have another bombing of Odessa area, so lots of explosions, and we see that the Russians are working on this direction, on this shore of the Black Sea. Currently, we can't tell for sure what exactly the Russians are planning. Maybe it's the Ukrainians who are planning to do something, and the Russians are just trying to prevent the, let's say, the development of any Ukrainian offensive operational direction. I'll remind you that Budanov himself a few weeks ago reported that they're planning to start a special operation on Crimea and Kinburn Spit probably. So now the Russians probably decided to listen to these words and to just secure the area as much as possible. So anyway, something big is going to happen very soon. We see the activization of Russian forces. Previous time, once again, we return back to the missile strike. The last time the Russians were attacking Ukraine with massive missiles was around 44 days ago. So maybe the Russians managed to concentrate and accumulate additional number of missiles during the previous months and a half. That is enough to start the second phase or the second offensive somewhere, maybe in Belgorod area, maybe to develop offensive operation further to the west in Avdiivka. Now let's move back to Avdiivka. We have a lot of very interesting details and updates from the territory. The Russians have almost established complete control over the village by the name of Toninka. We have adjusted the map. Now we show the territory as a gray zone because I think that maybe today, maybe tomorrow, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation will provide us additional information and will confirm the Russian complete control over the territory, because it's probably third or fourth day in a row when the Russians are saying about the end of the battle, and now that there is like clearing procedures, clearing operations, and something like this. So we are going to wait a little bit more. No changes on Berdichi, no just clashes, and the Russians continue offensive operation and storming the Ukrainian positions in the village by the name of Semenovka. So the Russians are attacking this way as well. So this situation continues developing, and maybe this is the reason why the Russians start bombing Ukraine. They want to force the Ukrainians to move air defense from the area, because the Russians are about to break this defense belt, and after that they will continue movements. We have adjusted the map in the vicinity of Novomikhailivka based on Russian attack with a convoy towards these fortifications. But we don't have more updates, so for now we'll keep the area as is. And additional reports are coming from the area of Ivanovska. The Russians, after a very long probably operational pause, maybe a week or two, renewed their offensive. Massive attacks in the village. The Russians are trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back, so we'll see what is going to be next, whether the Russians are able to do this or not. I'll remind you that still the Russians haven't managed to resolve the issue with the hill, so it's going to be a very difficult operation, but we need to wait. We need to wait, and obviously soon we're going to receive the first results. Interesting details are coming from Belogorovka area. If you remember, we were talking a lot about the situation in the region. During the previous months, the Russians were bombing and pummeling, just ruining the area till ruins. The Russians were attacking Siversk with aviation, with artillery. The Russians destroyed convoy with reinforcements that the Ukrainians were trying to send. The Russians basically reduced till zero the area in the vicinity of the hill. Just to remind you, the video of attacks against the forest, against these forests with the use of RBK 500 cluster rounds, and the final, let's say, part of the video. And we were expecting when the Russians are going to start the final rush, the final attack towards the landfill. And today the Ukrainian sources published the video of Russian attack. The Russians were attacking the landfill from Zolotorivka. The Russians were moving something like this, and then through the brushes, trees, and they were trying to storm this area. Currently, we can't tell for sure whether the Russians managed to establish control over the territory, whether the Russians managed to get to the landfill or not, but the video was published by 54th Mechanized Brigade, who's responsible for protecting the territory. And according to geolocation's video, we have a lot of Russian armored vehicles, a lot of Russian personnel carriers were basically damaged and destroyed as a result of FPV drone strike, artillery strike. So if we make a conclusion based just on this video, we can say that the Russians were completely defeated during that attempt to attack, but that was probably the first attempt when the Russians were trying to discover the artillery positions. Obviously, the next few days there are going to be more attempts and so on. The Russians are getting closer and closer to Terny. We have additional changes on the map, so they're about to start the real clashes in the village itself, so let's wait. And now we are moving according to Belgorod, sources are saying that the Russians managed to clear the area completely, and we, for example, start receiving first evidence of this information. For example, on this video we can see probably the last Ukrainian soldiers abandoning their positions from Kozinka. This is like the video of evacuation process. The Ukrainian evacuation machine arrived, and then the Ukrainians start evacuating wounded soldiers. And then we have another video how another Ukrainian personnel carrier was moving from Kozinka towards the Ukrainian positions, towards the mainland, and this armored personnel carrier was tracked by the Russians. On this area we see another group of Ukrainian armored vehicles, and then all of them moved back towards, let's say, Kharkiv or something like this. So based on these two videos we can make a conclusion that evacuation machine was moving something like this, and then another Ukrainian group was moving also something like this. So based on these two videos, at least these two short episodes, we can make a conclusion that Ukrainians start abandoning their positions and that they have finished the battle for Grevaron area with loss, and very likely now they are going to start something more, something interesting and something new. Or the Russians are going to start, and now the Ukrainians just try to redeploy forces to the area of possible Russian attack. Now let's move to political events. These days John Sullivan probably visited Ukraine, Kyiv. He had conversation with Putin, with Zelensky, and he told him that the states will, let's say, vote for $60 billion military aid. Probably he was forcing and trying to force Zelensky to adopt mobilization law, and that was something like a guarantee. First you adopt the mobilization law of young people who is younger than 25, and we will give you 60 billions for this. So very likely that very soon the situation with mobilization, the situation with the military help will be resolved, and starting from June Ukraine will start receiving significant number of military aid from the Western countries. From the other side, we continue receiving the videos of redeployment forces in Romania towards Moldavia, towards Ukraine. And the sources are saying that these are French armored vehicles or something like this. Currently, we can't tell for sure whether it's true or not, but we see another stage of escalation on the territory of Ukraine in the special military operation. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.